You know what I'm saying? Uh,
Bro, he's dead.
If you try to keep your distance, you're likely going to get a quick range attack, so I don't even recommend going. That's all there really is to it. A pretty high health bar and damage output for mid-game makes this boss insane when you get the RNG formula.
I'll be coming in Georgia, yeah.
There is a somewhat reliable way to kill them. First of all, use darker lighting. It's great against her. With this, follow her side of locked and
California,
dodging the attacks that she throws your way. Some are great such as the grab. If you dodge through the arm, you can get a long way down. Another great one is the flame. You can literally walk around them and beat her senseless if you get in the right position at the hip. Stay close all the time and be ready for her to give some quick slashes if she's so inclined. When she buffs, unleash hell on her. Now you could run away from her here, but I don't recommend this unless you need to. Rather just hug that sweet ass and count the spins. This keeps you completely safe if you're hugging that booty. After the 6 spins, the 7th will be a spin attack, so roll and you're already in a great position for a heavy counter attack. At this point, just hope she's nearly dead and gives you some nice attacks to punish and not some of those crazy hard to dodge combos. Even with this strategy in mind, it can still be hard to execute. Her levels of aggression are sometimes as passive as a soft flower, as deadly as a scorpion. No matter how it ends up, it still takes plenty of skill to pull off the kill against this bootylicious maid.
This is my least favorite fucking part of them.
You played the Ring City, you know who remains, and I'm sure it comes as little surprise. I've got to admit that I'm somewhat hesitant with the last 2 bosses as the 1 and 2 because the DLC is so young, and we may find some 6 strategies later on to counter them, but I think the likelihood of that isn't too great. When it comes to Gale, in a lot of ways is similar to Nameless in a different words, but this will scale for endgame. I think Gale's help will scale for somewhere off the end of the clip game because it's fucking enormous. And unlike Nameless, his first phase is very erratic and hard to predict for about half of his attacks, so it can be challenging not to trade damage to some extent. He does have a lot of attacks like the long lunge and overhead slam that are great to punish and properly iframe, but that does require precise timing. One thing that does make him slightly easier is that he does stagger, but it's not on the level of Cinder. It's more like a brief deep breath and then get back into the action, but it does give you a chance to get a few hits in. The second phase I feel is much easier than the first, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. For the duration of the fight I stayed in close and found that you actually get some great windows of opportunity to attack. And sometimes he seems almost passive, but when he does go full aggro it can deal insane damage if you don't get out of its path properly. Overall, I think this boss is harder as an endurance fight than a mechanical one, but the endurance required for the fight itself is greater than anything else in the game. That is, other than our final boss. Incredibly pleased to see that we finally got what feels like a near-perfect dragon fight, and it ended up being one of the most challenging things the series has ever had to offer, at least on the surface. At first it felt like the fight was impossible. When I said Gale had a glitzy health bar, this is the fucking Ron Jeremy Longcock Silver of health bars. I've even seen players arguing that it's a glitch that he has that much health. Well, considering this is Souls, I find that hard to believe, but I have to agree, it is a very large amount of HP. Add in the fact that even with massive levels of bitch vigor, this boss can kill you in 2 to 3 hits, it gets to crazy levels of difficulty. However, even though I do think this is going to be consistently the hardest boss for me, I do have some decently reliable tips to give. First is go for the head. This may be obvious to some, but I wouldn't waste time going for much else since the head takes by far the most damage. And second, in going for the head as your target, I've found that if you stay close and in front, he is far more likely to do close-range melee attacks that are easily punishable. Another attack that is seemingly hard to punish, but in reality is much easier, is a downward fireball. Even though it doesn't seem so, if you wait 1 second, you can actually run into the
Oh my god, he just fucking spams that lunge, man.
Over the course of the fight, using these types of attacks can easily wear him down, but of course, you must be ready for the other moves in his arsenal if he does choose to use them instead. In my last fight with him, though, I managed to beat the beast down at level 79 using him with 3 Estus, and that was only my second DLC playthrough, so it brings me back to a single thought. These bosses can be such a mixed experience of RNG, different strategies, different builds, and so on. This is why I think there's so much merit to a community ranking of these bosses, but I do hope that you found my experiences and tips helpful, and most of all, entertaining. I want to thank you all for joining me today, and once again, I highly encourage you to take the survey in the description. Leave me a comment below giving your thoughts on as many bosses in Dark Souls 3 as you want. Don't just talk about the obvious ones either. Be sure to give us all your thoughts on some of the more obscure bosses too. I look forward to using it to make more videos how the community feels as a man in the full Dark Souls 3 boss experience. Until then, be sure to follow me on Twitter for all the latest updates, and be sure to check me out on Twitch where I punish myself in speedruns against these challenging foes. Imagine telling the Doomsayers of the Final Fantasy XIII Dark Ages that we would get a knockout mainline title in 2020, and that it would be Final Fantasy VII. Though I've always had a nagging curiosity, I've never played a single Final Fantasy game. That'll change with the golden opportunity to play a modern remake of the 5th generation's debatable GOAT. But that debate and why everyone anyone who doesn't give that nod to going on's greatest adventure is wrong isn't why we're here today. After plunging 50 hours deep into the 7 remake, I'll be ranking its bosses in a detailed 3-parter on both their difficulty and quality. This blended, evolving format I'm testing strives to downplay time spent justifying why I place the boss in a particular spot on a list, and instead emphasize the individual merit and challenge of each encounter. I'll still be giving grades to each boss in the following scale, creating an overarching master list as we progress in order of appearance. This is going to allow my commentary to fluctuate wildly from battle to battle, and to wait for those avoiding spoilers to watch as they play the game themselves. To that end, I'd like to thank Square Enix for providing me a review copy. I'll be avoiding all story elements beyond each boss, and save the majority of my game-related praise and critiques for a video essay to come. As for traditional rankings, I'll keep those alive through you. Check the description for a link to the community survey for boss difficulty. Leave a comment below on any boss you like for a chance to be featured in the video to come. I'll post the survey in each part and keep it live for 2 weeks to give you time to vote. With all of that said, let's get started with the boss ranking for the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Number 1, Scorpion Sentinel. Everything leading up to this point is a slow tutorial trip that introduces you to Sentinel's hybrid combat. Square kind of put a way to blend the turn-based into the original with a real-time bombastic battle. Breaking it down, each character has a string of light attacks by pressing square and a heavy attack by holding it. These attacks build the ATB meter, in layman's terms a meter with 2 full charges that you consume to perform individual actions. This can be a special attack, magic spell that require use, a simple breakdown that becomes more complex when you add an ability to swap between characters in the fly, hold up the menu to slow time and cue commands, each character's special triangle button technique that can only be used under player control, different weapons and builds offering more abilities, choosing whether to block or evade their assaults, and balancing all of this into a real-time strategy against your foe. Shifting gears toward the bosses, it's worth mentioning the primary style they fall into. I often throw around the words endurance battles to describe lengthy battles of attrition that deplete resources to varying degrees based on margin for error. Nearly every boss in this game falls into this category because the game asks you to balance your ATB between
What the fuck, dude? I'm dodging that shit.
Proper strategy over time through a
But I'm gonna... You're so stupid. Just go away, Orion, please.
breaking body parts or using an element of weakness. This can put them under pressure, causing the meter to grow more rapidly until they're staggered. At this point, they sit there vulnerable while taking 160% bonus damage, a percentage that can be amplified through certain abilities. Building this meter effectively while balancing their resources through strategic offense and defense is the key to 7R's combat. Forgive me for the lengthy exposition, but it's important to share understanding of the base mechanics at play in every battle. Personally, I found it difficult to wrap my head around even a quarter of this in the opening hour, so my opinion on the Scorpion Sentinel is weighted heavily toward how effectively it works as a teaching opportunity, while still offering an engaging battle. Starting with the former, it is an effective teaching tool. The aggressive use of difficult-to-dodge rockets encourages you to block what you can evade. The electric cell AoEs punish you for overly aggressive attack spam. The shift to the wall is a nudge to swap to Barret and queue up magic and cloud. The shield in the second phase that is dismantled through a backside weak point, further hinting to swap between characters to get a crack at the booty. There's the Omega Laser bit that has you hide behind obvious cover to note how key positioning can be for certain high damage moves. Even the finale with you breaking body parts to stop and self-heals helps you learn. This is all accompanied by dialogue from the characters that makes these things even clearer in the moment. And it is all clear as day in hindsight, but my first time through felt more oppressive. Instead of being able to appreciate the way these mechanics encourage desired responses, the procedural nature felt restrictive, frustrating, and even somewhat dull at times. You're given plenty of healing to offset mistakes, suppressing difficulty. The story beat of being a barrier to escaping the reactor adds tension, and the arena's clever design allows you to position widely without exploiting the boss thanks to its ranged abilities. I do appreciate the emphasis on strategy, but your options are so limited in the early game.
Just gonna do it again?
It allows the player much creative license. This becomes glaring in a battle that lasts for ages in the face of an ocean-sized health pool. I'll give it a grade of C for its quality, and an offensive rating that credits its teaching value, while less than exciting execution. As for difficulty, I give it a D thanks to its forgiveness and allowing heavy healing and simple mechanics on repeat runs.
The most extraordinary technology in sports senses your activity, and it puts it on fight.
Ow.
Extraordinary technology in sports.
It's my heart.
Oh my fucking god, dude. can I fucking dodge? Like, oh, I don't get it. I'm putting these inputs and it just doesn't do anything.
For a section that deviates so far from the standard gameplay loop, it was executed brilliantly. The build-up to fighting Roche is driven by story stakes of helping Jesse and your Avalanche comrades execute their plans in a safer way. Your barrier to that end is a speedy battle against a bunch of basic soldiers, ending with the grandiose introduction to Roche. The cinematics add great flair and never go on long enough to take away from the actual battle, which is spectacular. You can accelerate, brake, hit on each side, and use a big spinning slash or sword beam to hit him from far away. He'll do much of the same. Fire off sword beams at both you and your allies in quick succession, vary his speeds to make it harder for you to hit him, and eventually call in some lightning strikes fast enough to be tricky to evade. The swift chess match of speed throttling from side to side to avoid his assaults is a genius way to handle dodging. Normally when these type of chase sequences are added to games, they're a hindrance, but the mechanics from both you and the boss are responsive and enjoyable. There's a beauty in the mechanical simplicity and an electrifying edge in its execution. While it's handily an F-tier cakewalk in terms of difficulty, I give this thrill ride an A for its quality. Number 3, Rotion a Duel. Personality goes a long way, and Roche uses a delightful mania to antagonize you. For as much as he wants to defeat you, he's just as concerned with making the duel an amusing tango. This is exhibited by him fully restoring your health and MP before the battle, a nice reprieve since there's huge waves of basic enemies leading up to it. The scraps left behind even make a mob for you to brawl in the center of as a spectacle. Mechanically, Roche is one basic boy. There's loads of downtime between his light combos and lengthy thrusting, leaving a large window for you to give some focus thrusts of your own. His weakness to fire was lucky happenstance since I happened to have it equipped going in, which was a huge help in roasting it. Timing your evasion encounters isn't too tough, but there is a tinge of risk in dodging his delayed windups with a quick follow-through. There's also intensity added in the mono nature because you can't rely on diverted attention and an ally farming ATP to heal you. This is remedied by the aforementioned generous downtime, providing a fair opportunity to build ATP on your own. Difficulty is great for its place in the game, with satisfying story context at the apex of a long brawl, has interesting yet simple mechanics that are compelling in tandem with his personality, but are not overwhelming. Plenty of quality worthy of a B grade, with perhaps too much simplicity to stretch to the A mark. A lack of complexity that leads to a well-earned D for difficulty. Number 4, Enigmatic Spectre. A wonderful chapter of bosses is capped off by this boring blanket. This hooded phantom loafs around while you deal with hordes of lesser specters. Their only offense is smashing into the ground and shooting a small wave of spikes at you. Very easy to dodge, does little damage if you don't dodge it, and their health is closer to priceless yet delicate tissue paper rather than unbreakable steel. The Enigma, on the other hand, is one girthy lavender ghoulie. This is all about building stagger and unloading the brunt of your offense once you reach it. Thankfully, Tifa, the fist-throttling master of blasting bosses stagger, is here to help. Her unbridled strength buff makes her punches pack a bit more heat, can be used twice to double the trouble, and gives her access to the devastating rise and fall and Omni-Strike abilities. Though they deplete her buff, they
Oh my god, dude, I don't get it.
Is their ability to amplify the stagger damage bonus. There are a few moves in the game that can do this, so she is invaluable. Of course, I didn't have any idea about that in my first playthrough, so instead I slapped the Spectre until it died. It will float around, shooting magic rays at you, creating an explosive black hole, and bounding one of your allies, locking their movement. It's pretty passive though, and the basic mobs give you the ability to farm ATB, which is more than enough to stay healthy and offensively potent. It's mechanically dull, but I do like the story's significance and staging of the battle. Because of this, the mediocrity isn't quite worthless, garnering a D for quality. As for difficulty, I'll go with a D as well, since it's at least tanky enough in a group to provide some modicum of challenge. Number 5, Big Crab Warrior. I have to admit, part of what I valued in Roche's fight over bosses like the Spectre and Scorpion was its one-on-one nature. That isn't sustainable whatsoever, and I fell in love with party management, but I was really struggling to queue everything up early on. I relied too heavily on spotting using the quick mapped abilities instead of using the menu to command actions. That's a big mistake since the menu slows down time to a snail's pace, allowing you to carefully time your next move. In reference to the Crab Warden himself, I struggled to read his attacks despite the red-labeled names due to getting my fingers crossed trying to manage everything in real time. Totally my fault, but it did amplify the chaos. At least your goal is clear. Break the 4 legs to boost the stagger meter so it'll open its shielded weak point for a massive damage opportunity. Afterward, it shifts and calls in minor reinforcements. A solid distraction that allows for ATB farming, rinse and repeat until it pulls out auxiliary weapons for its final phase. Its attacks vary from a big charge to spin